What secrets lurk beneath the seemingly perfect marriage of James and Emily, leading to a sudden divorce and eviction? How will the lottery jackpot transform their destinies? Follow James's journey from betrayal to self-discovery. Subscribe to our channel and embark on this journey. God baby, you're really something. Every time it's like it can't get any better. And then it does, said Leo, as he reached out and touched her chest, causing a slight tremble in her. Hey Emily, am I better than James? He asked. She didn't hesitate. Much better. She said, so much better. I hope we can do it again before I go home. When James slipped into the house, Emily was already in bed. He poked his head through the bedroom door, but her steady breathing told him she was fast asleep. He returned to the kitchen and sat down at the dining table. What now? He asked himself rhetorically. He knew he should go to bed, but he was still too wound up from his night's work at the packaging plant. He thought about waking Emily up to see if they could have some fun, but quickly dismissed the thought she would be furious if he woke her up. Damn it, he muttered. Working the evening shift from 4 p.m. to midnight is just ruining my life. When Leo offered the job 2 months ago, the idea seemed so tempting. James wanted to do something with the house, but money was always tight, in no small part because Emily spent money like it grew on trees. James was just worrying about a situation at work when Leo suddenly suggested you should think about moving to the second shift. The differentiated shift pay will be very useful for the two of you. James was pleasantly surprised to find that Emily didn't mind. When he brought it up, so he volunteered to change shifts, and the jump in his first week's pay made James feel pretty smart. For the same number of hours a week with only minor inconveniences, he now received a good increase in salary. But the minor inconveniences soon became more serious than James had anticipated. Firstly, it was difficult for him to get used to the new sleep pattern. All his life, James had been accustomed to coming home from work or college and relaxing for hours before going to bed. Now returning home after midnight, he found it almost impossible to go straight to bed. Soon he became an owl. James also discovered that the new schedule significantly reduced the time he could spend with his wife. By the time he woke up on weekdays, she was long gone to work as an assistant at a retirement center. Consequently, the only chance they had to spend time together was on weekends. One of the main results was that the new working hours significantly reduced his personal life. To top it all off, rather than increasing Emily's libido, the lack of activity for a week seemed to decrease her appetite. When they spent time together on Saturday nights, James found himself having to suck up and coax her into some fun between the sheets. Finally, to top it all off, James discovered that most of the raise he had sacrificed so much for was not actually being saved. For Emily, the money in their joint checking account was something to be spent, and she seemed to fill even more of her time with shopping. To make matters worse, James was hesitant to sit down and talk to Emily about her shopping habits. The only chance he had for such a conversation was on the weekend when he hoped to sleep with her. There's nothing like a lecture on overspending to kill any chance of late-night passion. James hoped to invest the extra income in their old Victorian house with a beautiful large yard. They were able to buy it because the widow who previously owned it had allowed the house to fall into serious disrepair. James and Emily stretched their budget to buy the old house, and James spent most of his free time renovating it. He was very proud of what he had achieved, but he had even bigger plans for the renovation tonight. As he sat in the dark living room, those dreams seemed more distant than ever. I don't know how much longer I can take this, James groaned. It took him an hour before he was relieved enough to slip into bed next to his sleeping wife. When he woke up, it was already mid-morning. Having had breakfast quickly, he put on some old clothes and went out to mow the lawn. Pushing the old lawn mower around the property in the Texas heat took him a couple of hours and a lot of sweat. He was heartbroken that they didn't have the money to buy a rideable lawnmower. On his way to work that day, James stopped at the gas station convenience store near the packaging plant to fill up the tank of his SUV. While waiting at the counter to pay for gas, he noticed a Texas lottery sign at a couple of lottery tickets. Millie, he said to the elderly store owner, luck has been in my debt for a long time. You're just in time, dear. The draw is tomorrow. I hope you win. She smiled at him, giving him his change and 2 tickets. He put them in his wallet and forgot. The evening shift was hard. Usually the large Heidelberg press worked on its own, but the evening schedule required several short passes of the press, each of which required James to clean the rollers, attach 4 new color plates, and then carefully monitor the rolling until all 4 were printed. One of the passes required a 5th color, which made setting up and printing much more labor-intensive. By the end of his shift, James was exhausted, but when he returned home, he again found himself too nervous to sleep. He popped down in his favorite chair and picked up the remote control to turn on the TV, but decided against it. Instead, he sat quietly sipping his beer and reflecting on his life. James was the 3rd child in the family after his older brother and sister. He grew up quiet, practical, a good student and an avid reader. He had friends, thanks in part to his popular older brother and sister, but he was on the periphery of the crowd's popularity in high school. Not being athletically gifted, he volunteered to become the leader of the basketball team in the summer. He often went hunting with his father and loved the silence and solitude, but these outings mostly stopped as soon as he turned 16. A friend of his father got James a summer job at a large packaging company in town. As a result, James strengthened his lean frame by moving large pallets of paper from the loading dock to corresponding presses throughout the sprawling facility. Perhaps it was these changes in his appearance that attracted Emily Barnes to him. She was one of the most beautiful girls in the popular crowd and was dating some of the players on the football team. But something about James attracted her, and they began dating during their senior year and soon became a permanent couple. After graduating from high school, James planned to attend a local community college, but in his senior year his father, a carpenter, fell through the ceiling at work and became permanently disabled. A blue-collar worker's wages and his mother's job at a discount store allowed the family to survive, but college was no longer an option for their youngest son. James swallowed his disappointment and went looking for work. Fortunately, during the summer he made a good impression on the management of the packaging house and managed to get a job as an apprentice printer. Emily went to a local college, but she and James continued to live together. They married in a low-key ceremony as she received her associate's degree. By then, James had saved enough money to put a down payment on a house that needed renovation, and the two of them began married life in their own home. They agreed that children would wait until they were able to get back on their feet financially. They had beautiful dreams, but over the next few years those dreams seemed to fade like a photograph left in the sun, washed away by the bills they had to pay, the housework and the daily routine that life imposed. Where did all this go? James asked himself, and more importantly, what can we do to get it back? Awakening from his James tiptoed into the bedroom undressed and slid under the covers even in his sleep. Emily seemed beautiful to him and he involuntarily tensed. I can't wait for this weekend, he thought before closing his eyes. When James finally woke up the next morning, he was shocked to find that it was almost 10:00 a.m. and Emily had left for work without disturbing him. Today he planned to finish installing drywall in one of the rooms they weren't using, so he quickly made himself breakfast and then got out the mounting tape and putty. He had already attached large sheets of drywall with the help of his friend Daniel Wilson, and now he had to putty and seal the seams. By the time everything was ready for sanding, it was already 2:30 in the afternoon, so he put down his tools and made himself a sandwich. After lunch, he made dinner to take to work and then jumped into the shower. By this time, it was time to go to work. Luckily, the evening shift was quite normal, so by midnight James wasn't too tired or stressed. However, when he returned home, he was not yet ready to go to bed and turned on the TV quietly so as not to wake Emily. He was just leaning back in his chair when the Texas lottery game appeared on the screen. A pretty woman stood in front of a 10 million banner, reading out the winning numbers displayed on the screen below her. James hastily pulled the tickets out of his wallet to compare them and his breath caught in his throat. He quickly grabbed a pencil and scribbled down the numbers on the screen, then compared them again to the ticket he held in his hand. They completely matched. He jumped out of his chair and ran into the bedroom. We won. Emily, we won, he shouted, shaking her vigorously. Leave me alone, James. She muttered, I want to sleep. No, you have to wake up. James insisted, we won the lottery. Yes, and I am the Queen of England. She said, now let me sleep before I get angry, baby. James shouted. I'm not kidding. We won the lottery. We are millionaires. Look at the ticket. Emily tried to sit up and look suspiciously at her husband jumping near the bed. "Let me see," she said, and took the winning ticket from his hands. She went to their home computer and connected to the lottery website, seeing the winning numbers and comparing them with the ticket in her hand. She jumped up and shouted, "Oh my God, James, we just won 10 million. They hugged each other and started dancing around the room, until they lost their balance and fell onto the bed. The couple began to kiss out of happiness, which quickly grew into passion. James grabbed his wife's nightgown and tore it off in a hurry. "It was my good night gown." Emily screamed, but James just laughed. "It doesn't matter, baby. I can afford to buy you another one." He laughed and hugged her even tighter. Soon, they were making love with a frantic passion that rivaled their first years together. They didn't last long, but they were both so excited that it didn't matter. Exhausted, they collapsed and quickly fell asleep. When James woke up, he realized from the way the sun was shining through the window that it was already late. When he rolled over, he was shocked to find his sleeping wife, Emily, wake up. He said excitedly, "You're late for work." She opened her eyes and smiled widely. "No," she said, "I called and quit. I'll never have to take care of those old farts again." James was surprised but decided not to say anything. He wished Emily wasn't so impulsive. He felt that they should think things through carefully before doing anything rash. After breakfast, Emily wanted to call her family to tell them the good news, but James persuaded her to wait. "Baby, we need to contact the lottery people and ask them to check the numbers before we start going crazy, and even if we won, we shouldn't rush and need to think about everything." "Oh, James, you're being stupid," Emily snapped. "We both saw the winning number on the website and the winning ticket is in our hands. All we have to do is go and pick up a check for 10 million. "That's different, Emily." James said, "I don't think we should get everything as a lump sum. If we request monthly payments, we will have more money in total than we ever have in our lives, and we will be sure that we will not spend it all on something stupid." James could see that Emily didn't like what he was saying, but she didn't argue with him, for which he was grateful. After a while, she looked at him with a grin and asked, "So what are you going to do today, Mr. Millionaire?" "My father knows an accountant here in the city. I'll try to meet him after lunch to talk about what to do with the money. In the meantime, it's probably time to go to work." James replied, "Why on earth would you return to this place?" Emily asked incredulously, "You're rich, you'll never have to work again." "I just think we don't need to rush, baby." James said, "I don't want to do something quickly that we might regret later. Let me talk to this guy and see what he says, and then we'll decide what to do." "Okay." Emily gave him a stubborn look but said nothing. This made James nervous, but he decided that this was the best he could get out of her. So he went to call the accountant. The advice was eye-opening. James soon realized that many of his initial assumptions were wrong. The accountant even gave James a copy of an article from CPA Practice Advisor, a technology and practice management resource for accounting and tax professionals, about lottery winners and the pitfalls they face. It was a sobering experience, and James began to realize that things weren't going to be as easy as he thought from the certified public accountant's office. James went to work. The shift started out normal enough, but shortly after the lunch break a noise was heard in the background. Then James heard loud voices, and it even seemed to him that someone was shouting his name as he turned away from the press he was working on. He saw Daniel, his best friend on the shop floor, walking towards him with a big smile on his face. "Oh, you lucky son of a," Daniel yelled. "Why didn't you tell me that you won the lottery?" Before James could think of anything to say, Daniel was shaking his hand and other employees were crowding around patting him on the back. The questions flew fast and furious. Was he going to quit his job? What is he going to buy first? Will he take a lump sum payment or monthly check? James was stunned. He turned to Daniel and asked, "How did you know we were going to keep it a secret until we figure out what to do?" "It was on the 600 news, so now everyone in town knows about it." Daniel said. Just at this moment, the director of the packaging house came to try to disperse the commotion, but without much success. Finally, he turned to James. "Why don't you take a sick day and go home, James? Otherwise, we won't finish our work tonight." James apologized for disturbing him and headed to his SUV. He was upset by the premature revelation of their good fortune and couldn't wait to ask Emily what was wrong. But when he returned home, he found a circus on the front lawn with a crowd of friends and relatives, reporters, and a news truck. As soon as he opened the door of his SUV, he was immediately pulled into the middle of the chaos. Emily stood in a spot of light from the lamps installed by the television crew. As James walked toward her, he couldn't help but notice that she had combed her hair and put on her most beautiful dress. Apparently, the reporters didn't take her by surprise. His blood pressure went up a few more notches. He grabbed her arm and pulled her away from the reporter who was trying to interview her. "What the hell is going on, Emily?" he demanded. "We agreed that we would keep this a secret until we decided what to do. Don't be upset, James." Emily said, "I just had to tell my family, and I think it all took off from there. The next thing I knew, Channel 4 was calling me to set up an interview anyway. It's too late now, so we might as well enjoy it." With these words, she turned to the reporter and continued the interview. James could do nothing but stand solemnly while Emily happily chatted in front of the cameras. The ordeal wasn't over when the crew finally packed up and left. Several of their neighbors and friends continued to mill around, each wanting a chance to congratulate James and Emily on their good fortune. Even after the couple finally retreated to the safety of their home, the phone continued to ring from well-wishers until James finally disconnected the call and let the answering machine handle everything. He popped down on the sofa and looked at his wife. "It would be better if you didn't tell anyone yet," he said. "Sadly, our lives just got so damn complicated." Emily was unperturbed. "Don't be so suspicious, James. There are no complications that 10 million can't fix." James shook his head. "First of all, Emily, the accountant said that we won't get 10 million. Uncle Sam and the state of Texas will have their share before we see a penny. And secondly, if you take all the money at once, they will give you only part of the total amount. I think we would be much better off taking the money in installments rather than all at once. This way we will get more, and besides, many winners have gotten into trouble trying to handle so much money." Emily shook her head irritably. "Well, now you're acting stupid, James. There are a lot of things I want to do, and now we finally have the money to do them. There's no reason to turn off the tap when we have a full lake to draw from." James just shook his head. "We'll talk about this again when everything calms down a little," he said, and went to open a can of beer. Over the next few days, the frenzy over the news began to subside, but James and Emily continued to be besieged by visitors and guests. They also began receiving offers from luxury car dealers and high-end real estate brokers, each hoping to make a big sale to the new millionaires in the area. But despite all the distractions and interruptions, the disagreement between James and Emily continued without the slightest sign of resolution. How to handle money became such a bone of contention between them that by the end of the weekend, James was happy to be back at work around 5:30 in the evening. Leo's phone rang. "Hey, Leo," Emily's voice was heard. "When are you coming to see me again?" Leo laughed. "Now that you're rich, I wasn't sure you'd be interested in dating me." Then he heard dissatisfaction in her voice. "Oh, Leo, you know I wouldn't do that well in high school. You just blew me off." He replied, "Yeah, but that's because you got caught with weed and had to drop out of school. My dad would have killed me if he caught me talking to you. After what happened." Leo just laughed. "Be that as it may, now Dad is not around, nor is this saint-inking husband of mine." Emily continued in an insinuating voice, "So why don't you come?" "I don't know, Emily. I've never had a night with a millionaire before." He said, "Well, if you drag yourself here, then maybe you'll have a chance," she said impatiently. He laughed and hung up while waiting for her lover after their conversation. Emily remembered her school days. Leo was her first and she fell head over heels for him. But their relationship ended when the school principal found marijuana in Leo's locker. Although the allegations that he was involved in trafficking were never proven, the school board had more than enough reasons to expel him. His family moved out of town, and his father strictly told Emily never to have anything to do with Leo again, no matter where he was. Her heart was broken, of course, but over time she became drawn to the quiet young man who seemed so thoughtful and understanding. Their relationship slowly blossomed, and by graduation, there was no doubt about what the future held. Even when James had to drop out of college due to his father's injury, Emily remained devoted to him, and they finally tied the knot when she received her associate's degree. Then Saw recalled one day when James came home from work and said that his old classmate, Leo Brown, had returned to town and was now working in the same packaging house. Emily said nothing then, but at the mention of his name, her heart sank. Later that year at a company picnic, she decided to rekindle her relationship with her ex-boyfriend. They found it difficult to see each other until Leo suggested that James moved to the second shift. Since then, Emily regularly spent time with him. God, how I needed this. Emily gasped 2 hours later, rolling off Leo and lying next to him on the bed. What's the matter? Emily, is your hubby not doing his duty? Leo teased. No, he doesn't. She objected hotly, and besides, he takes lottery money very seriously. He wants us to take the money over 26 years. He's such a bore. Leo turned and looked at her shrewdly. You know, Emily, it shouldn't be like this. I know a way you could get a whole bunch of this money just for yourself. You don't even have to wait for James to spend it. Emily turned and looked at him expectantly. Really, let's hear it, she said. When James returned to work at the packaging plant on Monday evening, everything seemed to have calmed down. Several of his friends came over to pat him on the back, while others expressed surprise that he didn't immediately quit his job. James tried his best to take it all in stride, but he noticed that every time he came here, the conversations in the background seemed to fade away. He had never wanted to be the center of attention, and now that he was in this position, he found that he didn't like it. The next 2 days continued in the same vein. The only real difference James saw was that some of the looks he got were no longer smiling. Some men even looked at him with open indignation. What does all of this mean? James was surprised. I never did anything to them. Nevertheless, he felt uneasy. By Friday evening before the lunch break, everything seemed to be back to normal. Mick was having lunch with Daniel when he saw the shift supervisor approaching him, accompanied by a stranger in a suit and tie. James looked up curiously as the manager approached him. Sorry to interrupt your dinner, James, but this guy said he needs to talk to you urgently. The supervisor said the stranger stepped forward and asked, Are you James Hartfield? When James acknowledged this fact, the man thrust an envelope into his hands and said, You have been served. As James looked at him in confusion, the guy turned on his heel and walked away. James turned to Daniel and asked, What do you mean you were served? Daniel shook his head in confusion, but the shift manager turned and motioned to the other. Men crowded around. Now, guys, get back to work. Then, as the rest of the workers reluctantly left, he turned to the 2 men sitting at the table. James, I believe if you look at these papers, you will see that your wife has filed for divorce. James gasped in shock. This can't be. Daniel took the envelope from James and began to examine its contents. I'm not a lawyer, he told his friend, but I think he's right. It says that this is a petition for divorce. James looked at Daniel incredulously. There's some kind of mistake here. Then he turned to the shift supervisor. I need to go home and talk to Emily. I have to get everything straightened out right now. The manager looked at him. Sadly, come on, James, just don't do anything crazy, you hear. As he drove home from the packaging plant, James' thoughts were in turmoil. They became even more excited when he spotted Leo Brown's red SUV parked in the driveway. James pulled up behind the big red Dodge Ram and rushed to the front door of his house. To his horror, the key did not fit the lock of the front door. After several unsuccessful attempts, he began banging on the door. Emily, let me in, he shouted, but there was no answer. Suddenly his cell phone rang, and when he picked up the receiver, he heard his wife's voice. James stopped knocking on the door. What are you trying to do? Disturb the neighbors. There's something wrong with the lock. Emily, it won't open. It won't open, she said calmly. Because I changed all the locks after you left for work. Why did you do this? Emily, James asked. I know they brought papers to you at work. James, you know very well that we're getting a divorce and I don't want you to come to this house anymore. But this is my house. Emily, James shouted angrily. I live here. You can't lock yourself away from me in my own house. Well, I can, and I've already done it, she answered quickly, but my lawyer says that the court should decide who gets the house. James began to curse, pacing back and forth when he noticed the SUV. Again, he asked angrily, what's Leo Brown doing here? I recognize his hefty SUV. Leo came here to comfort me during this difficult time, Emily said, giggling. Besides, I needed his help to change the locks and remove all your things. James looked around and noticed for the first time the black garbage bag sitting in the driveway. Suddenly, Emily's voice became serious. "Be that as it may, all this is none of your business, so just leave before I have to call the police on you for disturbing the peace." Just before she turned off the phone, James thought he heard Leo laughing in the background. James tried to call her, but she refused to answer, furious. He slammed his cell phone shut and headed toward the garage. It was locked, but the side door was open and James slipped inside. Hidden on the top shelf behind some boxes was his 9mm pistol. He pulled it out quickly, checked to see if it was loaded and tucked it into his belt. Approaching the front door, he noticed that several of his neighbors were looking out of their windows at the noise. He stopped and pulled himself together. "What am I thinking about?" he asked himself. "It's not worth going to jail for this." Ashamed of his thoughts, he hurried to the garbage bags and, making sure that they contained his clothes and personal belongings, put them in the back of the SUV. Then, angry and frustrated, he drove away with his tires squealing. He only drove a few blocks before pulling over to the side of the road to think, what should I do now? I was thrown out of my own home with nothing but clothes and I don't even have a place to sleep. Finally, he took out the phone and called his mom. "Do you mind if I stay with you today? I'll explain everything when I arrive." When James arrived, his parents were sitting at the kitchen table. His mother and father loved Emily very much, and James was soon subjected to intense interrogation. "What did you do that she threw you out?" asked his mother. When he finished his story about the previous evening, his mother asked James, "I didn't do anything. Only recently we loved each other and the next day she threw me out. I think it's because of the damn lottery that she's gone crazy or something." It was clear that his parents had their doubts. But they left him alone and he was able to go back to his old room and try to get some sleep. James spent a lousy weekend, mostly sitting in his old room, trying to sort through his emotions and understand what happened. In many ways, he felt like he was riding on the old-school playground carousel again. One minute, he felt angry and vindictive towards Emily. The next, he was full of loneliness and longing for his wife and the happy marriage that he once had. Elaborate plans for retribution were accompanied by denial that any of this was actually happening. The only relief he could find was when he went to the park to jog and do gymnastics. His cell phone rang on Saturday afternoon and he impatiently picked it up, hoping it was Emily calling to tell him it was all a mistake. Instead, he was invited to dinner by Daniel on Sunday. James was glad to have the opportunity to get out from under his mother's suspicious gaze, so he gratefully agreed. James usually slept late on weekends, but now he found himself waking up early, his head still filled with pain from Emily's actions and conflicting thoughts about how to react when it happened again. On Sunday morning, James decided to go to church hoping for some spiritual guidance. The decision turned out to be disastrous. As he sat on the bench, all he could think about was the families that sat around him. They made him feel his own loss more acutely than before, and he could not concentrate on the preacher's words. But that wasn't the worst. After the service, James tried to sneak away as quickly as possible so as not to talk to friends and acquaintances, but he was stopped by the crowd of parishioners outside, and suddenly he saw Emily's parents, the Bennetts, heading towards him. "And you still have the audacity to come to the house of God, after what you did to my daughter," said the old man in a loud, angry voice. James was stunned. "I didn't do anything to Emily, Mr. Bennett," he protested. "She's the one who kicked me out." "Of course," Mr. Bennett shouted, "after I caught you with some girl while she was working in a nursing home." "Is that what Emily said?" James asked in surprise. "But this is not true. I have never touched another woman." A crowd gathered around them waiting to see what would happen. "My Emily immediately said that you would deny everything." The old man fumed. "Well, you can just take your damn lottery money and make anyone you want happy, but if I were a few years younger, I would probably teach you a lesson." The old man scolded, shaking his fist in James's face. Mrs. Bennett grabbed her husband's arm and pulled him away from James. The man was still cursing under his breath, and the two of them walked away while the crowd watched. The people then broke into small groups and began to quietly discuss the scandal they had just witnessed, leaving James standing angry and humiliated. Confused, he made his way through the crowd to his SUV. That evening, James could only talk to Daniel and his wife, Sally, about the morning's meeting. It pained them to hear James's outrage at the false accusation, mixed with the pain of Emily's betrayal. As they listened, Daniel and Sally exchanged worried glances and did their best to help James with expressions of sympathy and support. Finally, they calmed him down enough for him to eat dinner. Daniel then asked James what he was going to do next. "I don't know, Daniel. I've never experienced anything like this before." James admitted, "Well, I know what you have to do first. On Monday, Sally said you better find yourself a good lawyer. There is a lot at stake in this divorce and you better be protected hell." "I don't even know a single lawyer," James said helplessly. "My uncle is one of them." Daniel said the prospect of a lengthy legal battle was daunting, but James realized his friends were right, so he took the phone number. "What about the packaging house?" asked Daniel. "Are you going to come to work on Monday?" James nodded vigorously. "Oh yes, of course, with everything so up in the air, I just need to keep my job, no matter what. I still have bills to pay and I can't live with my parents forever. I'll be there Monday afternoon, as always." When James pulled up to the packaging plant on Monday, shortly before his shift began, the familiar routine calmed him somewhat, but it did not last long. The shift manager was waiting for James at the service entrance and took him to his office. "James, I need to tell you something. Leo Brown came here today and quit. He told everyone who would listen that he would live with your wife and do it with your lottery money." As you can imagine, this little gossip spread throughout the packaging house like a forest fire. "Look, if you want to take another vacation, I'll definitely understand." As the shift manager spoke, James's head sank lower and lower, but eventually he raised his head with a determined look on his face. "Thank you, but I guess I'll go and do my job. People will still talk no matter what I do, so I think I might face that later as well as now." As he walked out of the office, Daniel came up to him and said quietly, "Hold on, guy." The rest of the workers seemed to avoid him as much as possible, but James could hear conversations in the background, followed by a few chuckles. He had difficulty concentrating on his work, and at one point Daniel stopped him from making a mistake. By the end of his shift, he had to force himself to stop from running out the door to his SUV. The next morning, James drove into town to meet his new lawyer, Uncle Daniel. The lawyer listened to James's account of what happened and then reviewed the petition that was filed with him. When he finished, he looked at James. "Since you two don't have children, everything will be quite simple. Texas is a community property state, which means that the two of you will split all of your assets in half, with each of you getting half." "Wait a minute," James exclaimed, "but I was the one who bought the lottery ticket. Doesn't that mean anything?" "Sorry," said the lawyer, "you contributed property to the marriage, so it is considered community property. The same would have happened if Emily had bought the ticket instead of you." James wasn't happy about this, but then another worry popped into his head. "What about the house? I put a lot of work into renovating it, remodeling it, and adding more space. Didn't I deserve it?" The lawyer shook his head. "James, the court won't want to waste time finding out who did what and how much it costs. The law stipulates that both partners are equal and both partners will share the assets. So unless the two of you come up with something else, you'll probably sell the house and split the proceeds. It's just not fair." James muttered, "It may not be fair, but that's the law," said the lawyer. "But look at it this way, with the fact that you won the lottery, you will come out of this situation in a much better financial position than most people who get divorced. Let me think and I'll call you back," James said and headed towards the door on the way home. He kept thinking about everything that had happened a month ago. "My main concern was getting used to working the second shift," he thought. "Sadly, 2 weeks ago all I was worried about was spending a fortune. Now my wife kicked me out of the house. She lies behind my back. People either laugh at me or curse me. I had to move in with my parents again, and my life has turned to crap. Winning the damn lottery only made things worse, not better." Over the next 2 weeks, James became a recluse. He went to work every evening but kept to himself during the day. He spent most of his time doing chores around his parents' house to help them unable to work in his own home. He devoted the rest of his time to daily training. All this time he thought about what happened and gradually began to formulate a plan on how to get his life back. The next time he saw Daniel and Sally, James told them what he had learned from the lawyer and what he had decided to do. Daniel was shocked. "Are you sure this is what you want?" "Boy, I've thought a lot, Daniel, and this is right for me. James said with conviction, "Okay, buddy, if that's what you want, I'll support you, but a lot of people will think you're crazy." Daniel said, "Maybe they're right." James smiled wryly. The following Friday, James and his lawyer went to a meeting at Emily's lawyer's office to discuss the property matter. James wasn't surprised to see Leo Brown. After everyone was seated, Emily's lawyer began to discuss an equal vision of the family property, but James stopped him. "This is not the way I want to do it," he said firmly before he could continue. His lawyer spoke up. "I would like to put it on record that I warned my client that what he was about to propose was not in his best interests, but he chose to ignore my advice." The lawyer leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms over his chest as a sign of irritation. James took the prepared document and leaned forward. "I'm offering a deal, Emily. I'll give you the lottery ticket. You'll get all the money, all the damn money. All I want in return is my home back and for you to admit what you did. All this is written down on this paper." He slid the copy across the table. Emily began to protest, but Leo grabbed her hand and whispered something insistently. Her lawyer was clearly taken by surprise by James's proposal. After some confusion, he asked for a few minutes to speak with his client in private, and all three left the room. Uncle Daniel leaned towards James. "I still want you to change your mind. There's no need to give up all your winnings. Heck, you could buy out Emily, share the house, and you'd still have a ton of money left over." James shook his head stubbornly. "I've thought about this a lot, and this is what I want to do." In another conference room, Emily objected loudly. "I'm not going to sign anything like that. If I do, my dad will seriously kick my ass." After what I told him about James before the lawyer could speak, Leo grabbed her hand. "What's the difference, Emily?" Leo began ingratiatingly. "Who cares what your dad or anyone else thinks? You and I will still leave this city. Besides, sooner or later everyone will find out what happened. The important thing is that if you agree, we will get all the money and not just have to spend it the way we want." Emily calmed down, but not completely. "Well, what about the house? You said I'd get half of it, and now he's trying to sneak out." Leo spoke quickly. "Baby, can you see it as even better? James is basically buying your half of the house for $5 million. For $10 million you can buy a bunch of houses." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Technically, it's not exactly $10 million. "Yes," Leo interrupted him. "We know that Uncle Sam should get a share. But the thing is, it's a hell of a lot of money, and if James is crazy enough to turn it down, then you'd be crazy not to take it." "I have to agree," the lawyer began. "This is a much better outcome than anything you could get in court. Forcing the sale of your home in its current unfinished state will get you almost nothing compared to receiving the rest of your lottery winnings. As for the recognition of extramarital activities, from a legal point of view, this does not matter. We have a no-fault state in such a case. The court does not care who did what to whom." Emily's face brightened. "Well, if it means nothing and we get the full $10 million out of the deal, then I guess my only question is, where do I sign?" The three returned to the main conference room, and Emily ostentatiously signed the agreement prepared by James's lawyer. When James received his copy back, he asked, "Okay, when can I get my house back?" Emily looked at Leo, who nodded. "On Monday, we will go to the lottery office and pick up the money. We're moving the next day, so you'll receive the key in the evening." As Leo and Emily stood up to leave the room, Leo leaned over and slapped Emily's palm. "We hit the jackpot, Emily." He gloated. He then looked back at James and grabbed Emily's ass, returning to his parents' house. James went in search of his mother, finding his parents sitting in front of the TV. He walked over and handed her a copy of the agreement Emily had just signed. "Do you want to know why Emily left me? Come on, read this," and he pointed to the appropriate section. "It says in clear English that she left me because she had an affair with Leo Brown behind my back. It was her idea. I didn't do anything to give her a reason to leave." Having finished reading, his mother looked guiltily at her son. "I'm sorry, I doubted you, son. Who would have thought that Emily would behave like this?" Meanwhile, his father was reading the contract and suddenly exclaimed, "Are you crazy, James? It says here that you gave Emily all $10 million. Why the hell are you doing this? Dad, you always said that there is nothing more important than a good name. Well, now my good name is back." The old man looked at him strangely. "That's a damn high price. Son, it's worth it, Dad," James said firmly, "to the last penny." The following Sunday James got up early and put on his best church clothes, but waited until the service began. As he entered the chapel and sat down in the front pew, a murmur ran through the congregation, but James ignored it. When the service ended, James stood up and asked permission to address the congregation standing in front of them. He cleared his throat nervously before beginning. I know that many of you now have a rather low opinion of me, but I have something here that I would like to read to you, Emily. My future ex-wife made this statement last Friday in front of witnesses. If any of you would like to take a look, I have posted a copy on the notice board by the door. Now I will read it to you. I, Emily Bennett Patterson, hereby acknowledge that I am separating from my husband, James Hartfield, in order to pursue my relationship with Leo Brown. I started this relationship with Leo secretly, while James and I were married without my husband's knowledge or approval. The breakdown of our marriage occurred solely on my initiative. James did nothing to cause it. I declare that this is a true statement made of my own free will, without pressure or coercion. Emily Bennett Patterson. As the congregation began to murmur excitedly, James walked down the center aisle until he came to the pew where the Bennett sat. Mr. Bennett, the other day you made some very harsh accusations against me. You didn't believe me, but maybe you will believe your own daughter. With these words, he thrust another copy of Emily's testimony into his father's hands. The old man looked at the signature and his face turned pale. He handed it to his wife, who had already begun to cry. Damn Leo Brown, he swore. James looked at them both and felt a surge of pity. Looks like she's fooled us all, Mr. Bennett, he said quietly. With these words, he turned and walked out of the building with his head held high. Monday night's shift was relatively normal, except that James's appearance at church was a big topic of conversation. But the next night brought new entertainment. The television in the break room was tuned to the local radio station, and the main news of the day was a report about the winner of the local lottery. There were cheers and hoots in the break room as they viewed Emily receiving a giant check from the Texas lottery and quickly hugging Leo Brown, whom the announcer called her fiancé. G.C. Daniel tried his best to keep the nosy and obnoxious ones away from his friend. But James still had to endure more ridicule about how he had lost both the lottery money and his wife to another man. The only thing that allowed James to survive this evening was the knowledge that after work he would be able to return home. His clothes and personal belongings were packed in the SUV, and after finishing his shift, he headed straight for the house as promised. Emily left the keys to the new locks in the mailbox. When he opened the door and turned on the light, he discovered that the house was a complete mess. Moving trash was strewn throughout the house. Food was left on the table and dirty dishes filled the sink. I bet this woman hasn't cleaned the house once since I moved out, he thought bitterly. After a restless night's sleep, James woke up early Wednesday morning and began cleaning up, starting in the kitchen after washing the sink and dishes. He made coffee and went out to get the newspaper. To his horror, he found a photograph of himself and an article entitled "The World's Unluckiest Lottery Winner." The story detailed how James won and subsequently lost a 10 million jackpot, giving it all to his soon-to be ex-wife. The author seemed to find the situation funny, but James did not if the newspaper article didn't upset his stomach enough. The phone call James received from his sister an hour later did. Is it true what they write in the newspaper? She asked aggressively. When he admitted that this was mostly true, his sister snapped at him. Why can't you do anything right, James? We were going to borrow money from you for a down payment on a house. You just ruined our plans. Then she hung up. Maybe I shouldn't expect a Christmas card from her this year, he thought, trying to make light of it. But the truth was that he felt bad for not being able to help his older sister. She and her husband were going through a financial crisis, and he would be happy to lend her some money if he could. The humiliation of being the source of endless gossip, combined with the loneliness of life without Emily, after they had been married for so long, plunged James into a monastic lifestyle. In the following months, with the exception of occasional visits to his parents or to Daniel and Sally, James devoted most of his free time to working on the house he had reclaimed at such great cost. He continued to redesign and renovate the existing structure and then undertook an ambitious expansion. One of the few bright spots for James was the pleasant discovery that the money problems he had before winning the lottery soon disappeared. His simple lifestyle, combined with not having to pay for Emily's extra expenses, not only balanced his budget, but also provided the additional funds needed for renovations. From time to time, his friends and relatives tried to set James up with some woman, but although James did not refuse, none of the dates led to anything. After a while, it became obvious that he was not ready to commit to another woman, and his friends eventually decided to leave him alone until he was ready. Almost a year later, Daniel called him on a Saturday. "Can you help me, buddy? My younger sister is moving to the city and I could use some help moving their things to her new apartment." James drove to Daniel's house to meet his friend, and as the two of them drove to his sister's new apartment, Daniel explained the situation. Lucy is trying to escape from a cruel situation. The last time her husband John hit her, she reported him to the police and then called me. She has started divorce proceedings, but she's afraid of this idiot and tries to stay as far away from him as possible. "I hate men who beat women," James replied. Then he looked back and saw where Daniel was directing him. "Are you sure this is the right address? This is not the best place for a single woman to live." "I know," Daniel said, "but that's all she can afford right now. I would take her to my place, but we don't have room. Besides, it's not just her. She also has a 4-year-old daughter." Just then they arrived at a rundown apartment complex and noticed a rental van parked at the entrance. After James parked his SUV, Daniel got out and walked over to hug his sister and niece. When Daniel introduced James, Lucy shook his hand, but James noticed that she was not looking at him directly. He also noticed the remains of a bruise under her eye and felt anger rise within him. The girl was not as timid as her mother. She walked up to him and looked up. "I'm Lily," she said. "Are you a good man?" James couldn't help but smile. "I guess I'm a pretty good person." He said, "Okay, then you can be my friend," she said, and extended her hand to him. James laughed and shook it. "Okay, Lily, let's be friends." Then he turned and began helping Daniel unload the SUV. After they both finished, Lucy offered them a cold drink and thanked them for their help. "Don't let Lily bother you," she said quietly to James. "She's just a little lonely." "Oh, she doesn't bother me at all," James replied. "I still love children." Lucy smiled gratefully. From then on, James usually saw them when Daniel and Sally invited him to dinner. He learned that while Lucy worked at Walmart in town, Sally would babysit Lily along with her girls. Considering how much Lucy probably made at Walmart, James assumed that Daniel and Sally were also helping her financially, but Daniel never said anything about it. A month later, while Daniel was helping James with the plumbing, his cell phone rang. When he picked up the phone, the look on his face told James that something bad had happened. "Well, be right there," Daniel shouted and slammed the phone. "This is Lucy," Daniel shouted. It seemed to her that John was looking through the window of their apartment. "Come on, James," he said. "My SUV is right in front of the house." The two men rushed to New York's apartment. James grabbed a wrench from the toolbox and ran towards New York's block, Daniel close on his heels. They saw a tall man angrily pounding on the door, and James shouted, "Hey, you get out of here," seeing James and Daniel running towards him. The man quickly ducked around the corner of the building and disappeared while Daniel went to see if he had left. James knocked on New York's door. "Lucy, it's me, James. He is no longer there. Open up." After a moment's hesitation, Lucy opened the door a crack and looked out. Recognizing James, she opened the door and let him in. "Are you okay?" James asked insistently. "I'm shaking, but I'm not hurt," she said with tears. "Where is Lily?" he asked. "I sent her to the bedroom," Lucy replied. James quickly walked down the hallway to check on her. At first he didn't see the girl anywhere, but just when he was about to panic, he noticed a socked foot sticking out from under the bed. He dropped to his hands and knees and looked under the bed. "Hello, Lily, it's me, James. You can come out now." When the girl crawled out from under the bed, she jumped into James's arms, and he carried her back to the front of the apartment where Daniel was comforting Lucy. "Why did my dad yell at us?" asked Lily. "Why did he hurt my mom?" "I don't know, Lily," James said, "but he's gone now." Daniel's nod confirmed this, "and we won't let him hurt you or Mom anymore." "That's right," Daniel said, "and you're moving into my home tonight." Lucy looked at him gratefully. Having locked the apartment, all four squeezed into the cab of James's SUV. On the way back, Daniel called his wife and Sally was already waiting for them at the door. She hugged Lucy and leaned over to hug Lily. "I know everything," she said to the girl. "Let's have a sleepover with us tonight." Lily beamed at this idea and went to play with Sally's children. The four adults sat down in the living room. Daniel turned to his sister and said firmly, "Everything is decided. You will not return to that apartment again. Now that John knows where you live, there's a chance. He'll come back. But I can't force myself on you like that." Lucy protested. "There's simply no room in your house for the two of us. I'll be fine in the apartment after today. John won't dare come back. You're just not safe there. Well, manage somehow." Sis Daniel replied stubbornly. The three continued to argue, while James sat and listened. Finally he spoke. "Maybe there is another option." The others turned to him. "I have a big old house in which there is no one but me. You can stay with me if you want." Then he blushed, realizing what he had just said. "I mean, you can stay in the new bedroom. I added it has its own bathroom and doesn't even have furniture yet, so we could put your things in there. Besides, I work the evening shift, so it's unlikely you'll ever see me." His voice trailed off as he thought about how his proposal might sound to Lucy. Maybe this isn't such a good idea. He continued sheepishly, but Daniel intervened. "No, that's a great idea. If you don't mind, James." He turned to his sister. "Listen, James has been my best friend for a long time, and Sally and I both vouch for him. JN doesn't know where to look for you, so you'll be safe there. At least this will give us time to come up with something else for the long haul." Lucy was hesitant, not wanting to intrude, but Sally and Daniel convinced her. Daniel and James left in James's SUV to begin moving New York's meager belongings to James's house. When they finished, Sally brought Lucy and Lily over so they could tour the house. Lucy was grateful, but Lily was not impressed. "Well, where's your swing?" she asked, looking out the back window. James smiled. "I don't have them, Lily, but there is a park nearby and your mother can take you there to play." "Well then, I think everything is in order," said the girl, and the issue was resolved. The first few days of the new arrangement were a bit awkward, as James and Lucy tried to stay out of each other's way as much as possible during the week. This was no problem, since Lucy worked during the day and James left for work before she returned. But weekends were a completely different matter. On Saturday morning, James woke up to the smell of cooking coming from the kitchen after showering and dressing. He discovered that Lucy and Lily had prepared a large breakfast of bacon and eggs. "That's great, but you shouldn't have worried so much," James said gratefully to Lucy, sipping his coffee. "You were so kind to me and Lily, so it was the least I could do." Lucy smiled. Lily looked at him over her plate. "You snore," she said, and her mother gasped. James just laughed. "You're right, Lily. I do." He fell silent and his face darkened, but he quickly regained his smile and continued. "I've already been told about this." After breakfast, James went out into the backyard to do gymnastics and Lily came out to watch him. "What are you doing?" she asked curiously. "I'm doing exercises." James replied. "Oh, what is exercise?" asked Lily. "It's a game that adults play." James answered, "Do you want to try?" When the girl nodded, he made her stand, placing his hands on her waist. "Now pull your hands up and put them behind your head and then touch your shoulders. Then bend down and touch your knees and toes," he told her, showing her what to do. "Not very fun," she said irritably. James's childhood memory flashed back to him. "That's because I didn't tell you the other part of the exercise. You have to hum with these words." James began to chant head and shoulders, knees and toes, without ceasing to perform the ritual. Lily quickly picked up the simple melody and began to repeat the movements with him. Lucy came out to the back porch to look. "Don't bother, Mr. Patterson," Lily shouted. "It's okay," James said quickly. "We're playing." He continued to show Lily a series of warm-up exercises before starting her morning run. "If you want, Lily, we can repeat this tomorrow," he told the girl before leaving. From that moment on, every time the little girl got up when James went out to do exercises, she wanted to do them with him. She couldn't do all the exercises or do them as long as James, but she loved playing head and shoulders, as she called it, with him at first. Lucy just watched them to make sure Lily wasn't causing problems, but after a while she also started doing gymnastics. At first she lacked stamina, but soon she began to keep up without difficulty. As James went through all the procedures, he couldn't help but notice how good she looked, in shorts and a t-shirt. After warming up, James went for a morning run and Lucy and Lily went into the house to prepare breakfast. By the time he returned, a hearty meal was already waiting for him. After living on cereal boxes for so long, James found a home-cooked breakfast a real treat. On weekdays while Lucy worked in the store and Lily stayed with Sally and her children, James continued to renovate the house. He paid special attention to the bedroom and bathroom that Lucy and Lily shared, trying to make it more enjoyable for the two of them. He had been alone for a long time and found that he enjoyed having housemates, even if it was somewhat unusual work. That evening was unremarkable, but as he was cleaning up before going home, James heard two other men in the restroom mention a name he hadn't heard in a long time. "You'll never guess who my brother saw last weekend." The man said Leo Brown. "My brother was in Dallas and ran into Leo and Emily at a nightclub. Leo told him that they had just returned from Atlantic City. They spent the money like water and then took him to their mansion in the richest area of the city. My brother said they live like a king and queen." The mention of his ex-wife and the man who took her from him brought back all the anger and pain that James thought was long gone. He drove home, remembering all the events associated with Emily's betrayal and James's subsequent humiliation. By the time he got there, he was so tense that he knew he wouldn't be able to sleep. So he sat in a chair and quietly turned on the TV, hoping it would distract him. A few minutes later he heard a sound behind him and looked back to see Lily peeking around the corner. "What are you doing at this late hour, young lady?" he asked. With a smile on his face, the little girl entered the room completely. "I woke up and couldn't sleep. Would you read me a story?" James felt that he should be strict with her and order her to return to bed, but she looked at him so pleadingly that he could not refuse her. "Okay," he said, "just one." She beamed and quickly disappeared into her bedroom to find a book. By the time James turned off the TV, she was back with a book tucked under her arm. Without hesitation she climbed onto his lap. "Read this one." "Uncle James?" she asked. James smiled and, leaning back in his chair, began to read from a Dr. Seuss book that he had known since childhood. Soon the girl closed her eyes, but James did not know whether she had fallen asleep or not, so he continued to read in a quiet sing-song voice. He was awakened by the smell of breakfast being cooked and found himself still lying in his chair, with Lily sleeping on his chest, covered with a blanket. He rolled onto his side to get Lily into the chair, wrapped her in a blanket and walked into the kitchen. Lucy smiled at him over the stove and said, "Looks like you got tired of your audience last night." James blushed. "I'm sorry about that. I didn't want to wake her, but she said she couldn't sleep and wanted me to read to her." Lucy just brushed off his apology. "You were so sweet when you read to her. I hope she didn't bore you." "Oh no," James said hastily, "I'm not tired at all. Actually, I actually liked it." Lucy smiled again and went back to scrambling the eggs. A week later they all gathered at Daniel and Sally's house for a picnic. Lucy played with the children in the backyard while James helped Sally set up the picnic table. The laughter of one of the girls caught their attention, and after watching them for a minute, Sally turned to James. "Well, how are you doing with Lucy and Lily?" she asked casually. "Oh, it's okay," James replied. "In fact, there are no problems with them." Sally looked at him shrewdly. "What do you think about Lucy?" "She's great," James replied. "She is a wonderful mother and a very good cook. Have you ever thought about inviting her somewhere?" Sally insisted. "You mean on a date?" James asked in surprise. "I don't know, Sally. It might be awkward, what with them living in my house and everything," he said. "Besides, Lucy might feel awkward if I ask. Maybe she won't want to. She probably doesn't think of me that way." Sally just smiled at him. "You might be surprised, James, anyway. Just think about it," she said before calling the others over for dinner over the next few days. James mentally molded over Sally's proposal. There was no doubt that he was attracted to Lucy when she went out into the backyard with him to exercise. James had a hard time maintaining his attention to his normal routine. She was slim and fit, and the way her body moved in shorts and a t-shirt was definitely distracting. Moreover, she was a pleasant laid-back person, so different from Emily, but since his ex-wife left, James has avoided the opposite sex, first out of a reluctance to expose himself to more heartache and then because of a lack of attractive prospects. Now, although he was certainly attracted to Lucy, he was worried that any attempt to change their relationship might affect it. If it didn't work out, he was used to having family in the house and he didn't want to lose that. If Lucy became uncomfortable, if she felt she had to leave, he would miss Lily too. All in all, it was a big step and James was hesitant to break the status quo. He was still debating the matter with himself that evening as he drove home from work. But his dilemma was immediately forgotten when he noticed an unknown car parked in front of his house. His anxiety turned to fear when he saw that the car was parked on the side of the road at an angle as if the driver was in a hurry. Then he saw that the front door of his house was wide open and light was pouring onto the lawn. John found her. He thought, his heart pounding at the thought of what he might find inside. He quickly parked his SUV on the street and ran into the garage. His ears began to ring as he pulled a pistol from its hiding place. Moving to the front of the house, he chambered around. As he approached the front door, he heard screams from inside and cautiously peered around the door frame. A man who looked like the intruder James had seen at New York's apartment a few months ago was standing in the living room, holding Lucy by the shoulders and shaking her. James was sure it was John, her ex-husband, and fear made it difficult for him to breathe. Everything seemed to go into slow motion. He gripped the gun tightly as he opened the door and slipped inside without either of them seeing him. He slowly raised his pistol and shouted, "Freeze." "Now, John." The man turned around in surprise, still holding Lucy close to him. Seeing James, he put his arm around the frightened woman's waist and held her tightly to him. At the same time, he pulled a revolver from the waistband of his trousers and pointed it at New York's head. "Don't come closer." He warned. All three froze for a long moment. Suddenly Lily appeared from the back hallway. "Mother," she screamed and rushed to her mother. But James grabbed her hand and pulled her back before she could get to them. "Stay still, Lily," he ordered. The girl began to cry and James noticed that the man was becoming more excited by the second. In desperation, James tried to find anything that could be done to resolve the standoff. He felt Lily trying to escape his embrace and suddenly a memory popped into his head. He looked down at Lily and said in a calm voice, "Lily, since we're all awake, how about we do some exercise? Do you agree?" Lily looked at him uncertainly, but then nodded. James looked up and caught Nana's eye. "Mom, you can do exercises too. It will be fun." JN looked at James in complete confusion, but James could only focus on Lucy and beg her to understand. He thought he saw something in her gaze and prayed it was true. He turned back to Lily. "Okay, Lily, now we'll all play head and shoulders. Let's take it real slow, like always, okay?" When the girl nodded, James said, "Okay, Lily." "Okay, Mommy, let's start head and shoulders," he said, drawing out his words. The girl obediently put her hands behind her head, then on her shoulders, knees, and toes. James continued and Lucy bent at the waist to touch the floor. As soon as she did, James fired at the attacker, hitting him in the upper chest. The man chuckled and backed away, allowing Lucy to slide to the floor. Lucy and Lily screamed when they heard the sound and James's second bullet flew up and to the left. The man began to raise the revolver, but James's third shot hit him in the forehead, knocking him to the floor. Lucy ran to Lily and hugged her tightly, while James rushed to the lifeless body and knocked the gun out of his hand. Then he grabbed his cell phone and dialed 911. When he finished with the police dispatcher, he called Daniel. "Get here quickly, Buddy John was here," he said after hanging up. He carefully placed the gun on the mantelpiece and walked over to Lucy and Lily, who were lying embraced on the floor. Suddenly all the adrenaline seemed to flow out of him like air from a punctured balloon. He collapsed on the floor and cried, clutching them both in his arms. "I thought I lost you," he sobbed over and over again. That's how the police found them when they came through the door. The detectives' questions didn't take long, but James refused to let go of Lucy and Lily the entire time, and they clung to him equally tightly. 2 years later, on a Saturday afternoon, James was getting ready for a barbecue. He invited Daniel, Sally, and their children, and he wanted the house to look neat and clean. Although it won't be for long, he thought with a laugh. There was still at least an hour left before the meeting started, so he was startled when the doorbell rang. When he opened it, he saw a woman with platinum blonde hair that was dark at the roots. She was wearing rather revealing clothes and high-heeled shoes, clearly expensive but seemingly well-worn. She stood looking at him with a slight smile on her face, and it took him a minute to recognize her hello. "Emily," he said evenly, "how do I look?" She asked with feigned modesty and slowly pirouette so that he could see her figure. When she turned back to him, she pretended to highlight her breasts with her hands. "How do you like them?" she asked. "I made them now. They are a full size 4. James walked out onto the porch and closed the door behind him. "What do you want, Emily?" he asked briefly. She shook her head and mocked his pleasure. "Is this really the right way to greet me? After all these years? I thought you'd be glad to see me. I thought you were in Dallas." He said I was, but it was a long time ago. Now I'm back in the city, and of course the first thing I wanted to do was come and look at. You've lost some weight. Looks like you're in really good shape. She smiled flirtatiously at him. "Of course you have always been a handsome man." Her compliment went unnoticed by James. "I was working on the house to finish it." He said. She looked around as if seeing the house for the first time. "Wow, you did so much to this house. It looks great. Did you add anything to it?" "I don't remember what was there." "Listen, Emily, I don't really have time to chat. I'll have guests soon and I need to finish getting ready." There was alarm in her voice. Of course, but the thing is, now that I'm back in town, I thought maybe you and I, could start dating again." Despite his best efforts to remain calm, James was clearly surprised. "What about Leo Brown?" he asked. In surprise, Emily's face distorted into a grimace. "That idiot," she exclaimed furiously. "He stole a lot of money from me and ran away from town." She shook her head in disgust. "It took the cops 6 months to catch him in Las Vegas, and by then all the money he stole was gone. But don't worry about him. He has a very comfortable room now in the state penitentiary." "So what happened to the rest of the 10 million? James asked. "It's better for you not to know what it is. After the cops were taking it all in cash and after the feds in the state took their cut, it was closer to 5 million. She said bitterly. "Maybe so, Emily, but 5 million is nothing to sneeze at." James insisted. Emily's gaze became distant and a slight smile appeared on her face. "Oh, things were pretty nice. For a while, Leo and I bought ourselves a mansion in Dallas. We had fancy cars, nice clothes, and everything you could expect. You should have seen the parties we threw, James. We had live orchestras playing and champagne flowed like a river. We went to Vegas all the time, where we were treated like Arab oil sheikhs. We went to all the best shows and everything. One day we chartered a plane and took 20 of our friends with us." Then the smile disappeared from face. "The fact is, when we played, most of the time we lost, and all these friends we had weren't really friends. They were just slackers. They always extended their hands for a loan, and none of them ever returned the money. They were happy to have fun with us. But when things got tough, they scattered like cockroaches when the lights were turned on." She shook her head, as if trying to get rid of bad memories anyway. "Somewhere along the way, Leo found a wonderful investment that was going to make us a fortune. Well, another fortune, but it turned out to be a scam and the money disappeared, just like our so-called friends around this time. Leo made off with the rest of our bank account. After that, the bank took the house and our cars. And here I am. So all the money's gone, all 5 million. James asked. She nodded sadly. "And you came back here looking for help?" he continued. She looked at him, hopefully, and nodded again. "Well, you're lucky," he said. "The nursing home where you used to work is hiring. I bet you could come back." He saw the anger flash across her face, but she took a deep breath and pulled herself together. "Come on, James, you know that's not what I meant. Besides, you and I once had something very good. If you would just give me another chance, I know I could make amends," she said, meaningfully, swinging her hips in a way that left no doubt as to what she meant before James could respond. Lucy came out the door and stood next to James. "Everything okay, dear?" she asked. He hugged her, and Emily's breath caught when she saw Nana's belly. "It was very nice of you to visit us, Emily, but my wife and I have guests and we need to get ready." With these words, he followed Lucy inside, closing the door behind him. "Who is it, honey?" asked Lucy. "Nobody special, just someone I knew before," he said dismissively. Later that day, James and Daniel grilled steaks while their children played on the swing set in the yard, watched over by Sally and Lucy. Daniel looked at his friend with admiration. I have to admit you were right about Emily and Leo. I would never have believed that someone could blow 5 million. But they did it. How did you know this? James nodded thoughtfully. People who are stupid and unreliable when they are poor do not become better when they become rich. I could not imagine that everything would end differently. The only thing that surprised me was that it took them so long to derail everything. At that moment he heard Lily's joyful cry and, raising his head, saw her playing with her mother. Lucy turned around and seeing James watching them smiled and waved. James waved back and smiled. You're lucky. Daniel said yes, said James. I think I got the big win in the lottery. If you're moved by James's story, don't hesitate. Subscribe to our channel now for more.